Every big win starts long before game day. On any given Monday, we go where cameras don't. Behind the contracts, the calls, and the chaos. We'll road trip with scouts, visit iconic campuses, step inside replay booths, and walk up to the luxury suites. Real organizations, real stories, real decisions. Lace up your cleats, buckle your chin strap. Here comes our GM, Matthew Miley.
Today on Any Given Monday, our guest is Mr. Bob Boland. Bob is a nationally acclaimed sports attorney who has held leadership roles in nationally ranked sports management and sports law programs at Ohio University and NYU. As a sports agent, he negotiated over 100 playing, coaching, and endorsement agreements, and he is constantly in the forefront of the ever-changing world of college sports and NIL. Bob was in a role that was the first of its kind, Penn State Athletics Integrity Officer. Bob's expertise and insight is sought out by national names like ESPN, ABC, CNN, Sports Illustrated, and many, many, many more. Bob now works with the law firm Shoemaker, Loop, and Kendrick, LLP, as a co-chair of Hospitality, Leisure Services, and Sports Practice Group, and he is also an assistant professor of law at Seton Hall University. And I made sure we had shout out to Philip Lee in Toledo for getting me this to wear today. Awesome. All right. So, Bob, it's clear that you have a deep passion for sports. Where did it begin, and what keeps it alive today?
I probably began when I was a middle schooler watching Wide World of Sports, and my mother, who was a reading specialist, principal, educator, said, "What are you wasting your time with that stuff for?" But it spoke to me in ways that very few things of it did. And in my own athletic career, which was okay, I guess, I wrestled and played football in college, so I made it a fair way through, but I was sort of middlingly talented. But I saw the connections of a better world through sport, and I still see that. So I am somebody who believes that sport can save the world. I at the bottom of most of my emails, at least in my law school life, I have a quote from Nelson Mandela that says, "Sport has the power to connect and change the world as few other things do," and I believe that to be true. So that still keeps it alive. Sometimes you get caught in the sausage making part of it, the part where you don't make change and you're fighting along. And I remind myself of the things that I believe in, that sport has the power to change lives, that it has the power to do great things, it has the power to move mountains and bring the world closer. And very few other things do have the ability to do that. So if Nelson Mandela could have kept the faith through his time in Robben Island and believed in the things that he believed in about the thing that I've given my life to, I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's talk about your career path a little bit here. So you have a fascinating and kind of unconventional path: lawyer, player agent, law professor, and athletics integrity officer. What drew you to the intersection of law and sports governance?
Well, I'd probably start by just simply saying nobody who's reached the place in my life that I have has probably ever gone down a straight and narrow path. And so I do think that there's been two consistent themes in my life. The idea that you should look at where the future crises come from. And I've always sort of done that. Whatever I've been doing in my life, I've looked to try to make sure I'm upskilling myself for what's next. And so much so that I tell you that it ended my career as a player agent. I was looking at the labor crises that were coming down around 2000, 2011, 2010, 2011, with lockouts in most of the major leagues. And I said, wait a second, why am I struggling out to do individual player contracts? Why am I not looking at bigger issues around labor relations and collective bargaining? And so sometime I shifted my pivot and I started consulting for leagues and working on coaching hires and other various things. So I think you always have to think about what the next horizon looks like and believe in it. and sports sort of gives you that. I mean, you always think about the next game. You always think about what the game after that might look like, and
Yeah.
it's a chance for to not necessarily avenge, but to figure out and get right what went wrong this week. And so I think that's a natural for me. So the Penn State one was a remarkable one. I probably should start there only because it's the job that probably marks my career most now because there are a lot of people that have been lawyers. There are a lot of people that have been agents. There are a lot of people that have been professors. Um, there's some people who have been prosecutors. I mean, I've had a bunch of moments where what was it, opportunity, training, and a little bit of luck met all at once in a serendipitous way. But I think the Penn State one is the unique one because it was so complicated. I was standing in the basement of the business annex, recently built and reopened business annex at Ohio University in Athens, Ohio. I had taken the job as the director of the Masters of Sports Administration program at OU about a year earlier. Maybe I was in my second year, so maybe a semester and a half earlier.
Hmm.
And I got a call from somebody I knew at Penn State who was the deputy general counsel. And he said, "Would you make some recommendations for somebody to be our athletic integrity officer?" I said, "Sure, I'll make recommendations. I know a lot of people who'd be great at that." He goes, then finally, after I had to think about that, he goes, "What about you?" And I'm like, "No, no, 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 no. I don't want that job. I don't want that. That job's gonna not make any fun in the world. Everybody's gonna hate you. You're gonna try to do what's right, and there's gonna be a lot of conflict." And then he said, "Well, but what about you?" And then I had a couple of thoughts that were mostly self-serving in that moment. They were like, "Well, I really have a consulting practice. I'd like to be able to talk with people about what my views are." At my time at Ohio, which produces a lot of college athletic directors from their program, I think they have about 12 of them total who are Division One athletic directors from that program, most of any single school experience out there. Um, I started tailoring it to what were the unblocked blitzers that were going to get an AD or a head coach fired. They're going to bring down an athletic department
Hmm.
or create havoc, even before I even thought about this Penn State job. And sure enough, I said, "Sure, I'll go interview." I thought this would be a great opportunity. I didn't really want the job necessarily. I was intrigued by it. And one of my mentors, not necessarily a close personal mentor, but somebody I really respect, who's been the head of three different teams, an NBA team, an Major League Baseball team, and an NFL team, Andy Dolich, said, "You should always run into a crisis."
Yeah.
And I thought Penn State was pretty much a crisis. I wasn't the first. It wasn't on fire necessarily, but it had been recently put out and was trying to hold it together. So I ran to that crisis to try to manage that. And I ran into three really interesting things that happened there. And I know you have some questions kind of set up for those, but and I don't want to get ahead of myself. But the first one was legalized sports betting,
Yeah.
widespread legalized sports betting in my first year. And anybody who's worked in college athletics knows absolutely nothing about sports betting. We've been forbidden from doing it for forever. I know and admire Rick Neuheisel, who's a famous former football coach who got fired for taking part in a NCAA tournament bracket by putting in a bracket in a for money competition. He got fired as the head football coach at the University of Washington back in the old days, the 1980s or 1990s probably, or early 2000s. Here was a guy with a law degree, very successful, and he gets fired for putting in a tournament bracket. So I was starting my agent career. No way am I ever placing a bet on anything around sports. I don't even bet. I don't even think about betting.
Yeah.
And that was true of most people in college athletics. We all had been told we can't bet, so we just don't. So what did it set up? We were absolutely really clueless at how we defend against the legalized sports
Hmm.
betting. We had to get some outside information. We needed to talk to some bettors. We needed to talk to how having a public line would protect us. We needed a surveillance service. So that was a really great learning experience. How do you learn to protect yourself? How do you learn to play defense against an offense that's coming? And we had gone to Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania state regulators, and said, "Hey, can we delay this a year? Just let us study it, figure it out, in hopes it might go away."
Yeah.
And sure enough, they looked at us and said, "No, they can bet on you, New Jersey. We're going to bet on you here." So that was the answer. That's been the answer. We're obviously in the midst of crises, but that was the first big crisis I had to deal with. Second crisis didn't give me a lot of gray hair. It wasn't the worst of things, but we had the varsity blues scandal in college athletics circa about 2019. And that was really three sort of scandals rolled into one that the FBI all kind of rolled up at once. It was some cheating on admissions through rating players who were walk-ons with either bribes or priorities in
Yeah.
exchange for contributions. I describe that as either payola or straight bribery. Some of it was some of it was a bit of a scam to fund programs. Some of it was a little more honest. I think the sailing coach at Stanford who did this to fund his program probably and received a criminal disposition probably was among the more honest, but it caught up a lot of activities out there. And then there was a whole other scandal about this one guy who was arranging either favorable testing locations for SATs or taking SATs for other people. So there were a couple of those out there that you could see, but all they got kind of rolled up at once, along with this guy, Rick Singer, who was basically advising people how to get prioritization in a lot of elite college athletic departments by being a quote unquote preferred walk on or walk on. We
Yeah.
didn't have that problem too badly at Penn State. We were very scholarship dependent. The only real exposure we had was with regard to change of campus assignments. In other words, it was pretty easy to get into Penn State. It was harder to get onto the University Park campus where all the Division One sports were. And so, if a sport gave a change of assignment a change of campus assignment approval, we watched and charted those, but we didn't really see any bad pattern in that. We watched and we even watched those players after they got to Penn State for a couple of years to make sure they stayed on the teams, and these were honest statements because we were trying to administer this in a careful way. And then finally, the last big thing that kind of came down my pike, although I dealt with some coaching complaints, I've dealt with some Title IX issues, I dealt with all the range of things that beset college athletics, was the advent of NIL.
Mhm.
And so that really excited me because I've been a player agent. I've done a lot of contracts with NIL attached to it. And so I wanted to hang around for that. I wanted to see the policy come into place. I will tell you now, having seen it then, and I'm writing a book on NIL that never seems to finish because we keep changing it every year. We're on a very different version now in year 4.0 or version 4.0 than we were in 2021. But I think the most interesting thing about NIL is that it has changed dramatically in every year, and we did such a poor job of educating to what its authentic purpose is. Even now, it's a system by which we pay college athletes without describing them as employees. I get that that's real, but every school, and we've set up collectives, we've worked with a bunch of schools in this space. The schools that are winning in this space right now actually understand better how to match the authenticity of who they get as athletes, how they compensate, and how they're able to compensate in a way that is unique and fits the school really well, as opposed to a one size fits all model. And even schools as different as Ohio State and Michigan. We worked on a collective at Michigan, but ultimately they're radically different in how they can admit, how they can replace, and how they can retain athletes. It's much harder. It's much harder for Michigan to get an undergraduate transfer in after the sophomore year than it is at Ohio State. That was true of my time at Penn State.
Mhm.
We had very few graduate programs that were less than a year at Penn State. So all those factors that are institutional actually color how you can succeed and how you can apply your NIL effectively. And if you can deploy your NIL effectively, even with a $20.5 million salary cap, supposedly, you're going to gain advantages. And I think we're seeing that right now. We're seeing that at Indiana where Cignetti has a great view of talent and how he can pick players up and how he can match them and can coach them to his system. We're seeing that in some other schools that are doing really well with that. Lane Kiffin at Ole Miss has done a really good job with that. And he's been fired at several other jobs before this. So it's not necessarily how good you are, it's how well you are fitting the NIL to your school, to your player acquisitions philosophy. And I know we're just talking football, but that has implication across all sports.
Yeah, for sure, for sure, for sure. Now let's jump over to your time as a sports agent. So, as a sports agent, you negotiated over 100 playing, coaching, and endorsement deals. What stands out the most to you from that time?
There are a couple of things. I'd probably say this to you but I'd say it within context. I'm a failure as a sports agent. I thought I was going to be a wildly successful, rich, have first round draft picks, be jet setting around the world, and live as a sports agent. I was much closer to Jerry Maguire's experience in the movie that my first year I had one professional client. He was an Arizona Cardinal who was a rookie free agent who left me. And it isn't that I failed. I was up to being a pretty mid-sized sports agent, but it's hard business to necessarily have what you do match your success because you're only as successful as your players are, right? And I remember working hard to get players at Marshall University when I was just starting out. I'm a former college offensive lineman, so I got the left tackle and the center, and I was a runner-up on Chad Pennington, who became a first-round draft pick
Yep.
quarterback till his shoulder went bad. And if I'd gotten Pennington as a first-round draft pick quarterback right out of the gate, I probably would never have looked back as an agent. I'd just gone on to just represent first-round players, and people would ask me who you represent, and I would have been like, "Oh, I got Chad Pennington. Look at him over there." Um, and so sometimes it's not what you do, it's or not what you it's not what you do, it's who you represent. And if they don't turn out the way you'd like them to, then you're going to be as successful as they are. And I like to always think about this, and as I reflect back on my time, but on other time, some of the most successful agents do their best work for people that are middling players. So I think those are the things that stand out for me. I think the other thing that stands out for me is all the people I met along the way who were incredibly nice to me, who are now a little older than me, which is hard to believe anybody's older than me at the age that I'm at, and arthritis and things like that I have. But I'm with them now sometimes, and they all get, Jack Mueller, Greg Clifton, Bob Lamont. These people were wildly successful, people I looked up to, and all of them are nice to me, and all of them are still friends with me now. So I think people saw something in me that was different. I had success, and I had a lot. I had a fair amount of enjoyment, but what it really did is it set me up for a much richer career in sports. And so typically, obviously, somebody's been involved in sports business, sports law education. Everybody either wants to be a GM of a pro team, general counsel at a league, or if you think about it, a very successful sports agent. There are so many other jobs in this field than just those. On the other hand, close counts in a lot of things. So setting off in that direction may help you find other really great things.
Yeah.
And I recycled pretty neatly. I've done a pro head coaching search in the NFL. I've consulted with a league. I've consulted with Goldman Sachs on stadium design. I've got pieces of a bunch of books. I became a guy whose brand was crisis, and I started getting on TV in an interesting way. Never think your life doesn't connect. Actually, the only people who fail this test are people who never look back on their own life. But I was a assistant district attorney in my first job as a lawyer in Staten Island, New York.
Mhm.
Not a place I'm even from. A job I got because I'd worked on the reelection campaign of the DA. I was one of like three young ADAs in a New York City borough that sort of, I won't say it's the hip happening place Manhattan is
Mhm.
necessarily, right? So it's an outer borough. I was one of three or four people who started in that what would have been my class, if you will. And I was the only one who passed the bar exam the first time. So I got put on something called the All City Animal Cruelty and Animal Crimes Task Force. Now, for me, it got me out of the office for a day and it got me into Manhattan most of the time. And I'm like, yeah, I'll take that. But what I learned to do is I prosecuted animal cruelty cases for the most part, dog fighting, abuse of animals, things like that. And there's some correlation that somebody who will abuse an animal will also commit domestic battery or violent crime. So there's a connection there. Staten Island's also rural enough that people can have dogs in backyards and some things like that you
Mhm.
don't necessarily have in Manhattan. So that animal crimes task force thing, then after I became an agent, coalesced to an interesting thing that got me on CNN, got me on the Today Show. When Michael Vick is arrested for
Oh
dog
yeah.
fighting, I am the only person in the world who has prosecuted an animal cruelty case, taught sports law at a major university, and has represented an NFL player. So I was like perfect for that. And then it moved into Tiger Woods and his crises about his sponsorship and his driving. And so for a long time, from probably 2006, 2007 to maybe 2015, any crisis in sports became sort of my business. It got me on TV. It helped me build a brand. I didn't necessarily capitalize on it in an always strategic way, but it helped me build a consulting practice outside my teaching at NYU, and I really loved it. And then in 2015, I got the opportunity. I kind of hit a life crisis, midlife crisis, if you will. I got the opportunity to lead the Ohio University program, which is the first sports management program at any university in the world. Started in 1967, so almost as old as me. And sure enough, I wanted to go with learn the secret sauce, what happened at OU, and I did. And OU is an amazing place. The school's a great school. Happy about that experience. And then of course that led into Penn State, and I ran into the fire, or ran into the crisis, if you will. So my life kind of works, and now I'm kind of back doing two things, so they can't fire me from both at once theoretically. Um, but I'm doing two things that I really enjoy and get me really jazzed almost every day. I get to teach, and I teach at Seton Hall Law School, which is, 30 minutes from my house. It's a great school. Everybody's bright. They can do this. They have an emphasis on sports law. They hired me to bring it back. I'm excited by what I get to do there. I'm excited by the school, and then I get to work at Shoemaker. And while I'm attached to the Toledo office or the Columbus office, I get to be around. I get to be around the whole Shoemaker footprint because I'm based mostly in New York, and it's wonderful. I get to be with they're one of the 200 largest law firms in America. I get a deal flow. I work with an extraordinary partner in Bennett Spire, who is clearly the AD and coach whisperer, and we're doing some amazing stuff. We're representing Penn State in the buyout of James Franklin's contract right now.
Yeah.
We're representing Brian Kelly at LSU, since he was a pre-existing client of Bennett's. And we're representing Oregon State in the buyout of their head football coach. And there are lots of tax issues that go with that. So I get to work with somebody I admire and respect every single day. And I get to work with a big firm that gives me some capability and purpose. And so it's kind of a perfect world for me right now. I get to teach, I get to practice. I bring the most current problems in law to my classroom, and I bring the ability to explain stuff in my classroom back to courtrooms and to law and to my clients.
Yeah. Yeah. So, now jump into NIL a little bit here. Do the current name, image, and likeness issues echo what agents have long navigated in the pros?
No, it's much simpler in the pros. And it's shocking because when I was educating people at Penn State about this, and I'm sorry I used the word educate, teach might be the better word, but it was really to explain what you're getting in this. The pro rules are so clearly set out and have been set out for so long as to what is team property, what is team opportunity, and what is athlete opportunity. And, so if you look at any picture or advertisement involving Shaquille O'Neal or Tom Brady, it's rare they're wearing their team uniform. They're wearing something that resembles it in most of their ads.
Yeah.
So unless it's an official sponsor of the league, you're not using the intellectual property of the school. And most athletes are comfortable with that. They know it, and they're getting paid. So they recognize what the limitations of their NIL activity are, and in many cases, they don't participate a lot in it. It's actually one of the challenges, I think, for baseball in particular. Baseball players are paid such a relatively high salary. They don't go out and they're really representative, and they play a lot of games, and they can really connect with people, but they don't really go out and market themselves particularly hard.
Yeah.
Football players wear helmets, so it's a little harder for them. Basketball players do a pretty good job of it, but so one of the challenges we have is that there just isn't as much promotion of the sports by the athletes. So in college, this is all a new open area, but one of the challenges is they were last to the table. So they were very disappointed when they learned, like, I can't do this. What do you mean I can't use my uniform? What do you mean I can't use my clothing? What do you mean I can't use my logo? Oh, no, that belongs to Ralph Lauren. He's a billionaire because of that logo. So that was a very big shock for athletes to find out what they couldn't do. And in the pros, it's so much cleaner because the pros have made it clear in your contract with the team what you get and what you don't get.
Hmm.
And what you don't get is the official things from the team unless they tell you you're getting it. And what you can do is everything that doesn't involve that. So you're always working on the outside for that. So, and even in some cases, that's a conflict, and they'll tell you that. But it was fascinating that pros were in a way much cleaner than college. And I think it was because athletes didn't have a really good sense of what the expectations were. They thought when NIL came in that it would be their opportunity to cash in. And it really was simply the beginning point, not the end point.
Yeah. And NIL is evolving so fast. And what are some of the gray areas that some outsiders would not be aware of? And who do you think is winning NIL right now? Is it athletes, brands, or schools?
Nobody? All right, I got to break that down because that's not a fair answer. That would be so athletes are probably winning. There's at least $1 billion of money going to athletes through NIL. That money never got to the athletes at that stage of their life, and that should give them better choices, more opportunity, and some comfort. And in many cases, it does, right? It doesn't, it's not a bad thing in any way. What it doesn't do is it doesn't give a consistent level of understanding or choice. And so a lot of athletes are entering into deals that they don't understand. They're entering into deals where they might be taken advantage of, and their expectations are much higher than what the reality is and what NIL could do as a whole. I think if you think of NIL as an opportunity and an opportunity that will give you some comfort while you make a choice, it probably provides a lot more clear a statement. But again, I think for a lot of families, they're thinking this is their lottery ticket that they're holding and thinking they're going to win. Now, when I play the lottery, I always lose, and my wife reminds me that lawyers with two jobs never win, and we're just not going to win. But I play anyway because you have hope, right? So I don't have a lot of expectation, but I think for a lot of families, and for a lot of people, that this is a high expectation. I also think because they're young and their families are in many cases unsophisticated around it, they don't know exactly what the money means or how little the money might mean. And I watched a lot of kids. This is one of the things I think is really going to be a tragedy. We're going to hear about this a lot more in the next few years. But if you go to four different schools in 4 years, you might make a professional league, but it's highly unlikely you're going to get a degree from any
Yeah.
of them.
Yeah.
You got to probably put 2 years in one of them to kind of make it work. It may be the last two. So we're going to have a group of people. I don't think it'll be a ton, but it may be 25 for 30% of college athletes who may have attended too many schools to ever have a reasonable chance to graduate. And that's a real big tragedy because for most athletes, sport is fleeting. The education is going to change your life, and the opportunity for more education than NIL affords in graduate school and extended eligibility are almost priceless if you think about it. So I think that's a crisis number one that detracts from the athletes winning. I think that athletes aren't winning because they don't understand how much money they're talking about. If you were thinking about how much money it would get you to finish school and not graduate or give up the chance to graduate, I'd say it'd have to be more than $250,000 in a year because after taxes, that's 125,000, and that's a nice middle class salary in most places. It's not going to be life-changing money, but if you're 21 or 22, sure looks like life-changing money, way more money than you've ever
Yeah.
had. Um, so that's a change too. And also then what is the climate of advice you're getting? I think the seminal change of it is you now get the chance to use a lawyer or an agent or somebody to help you. How good are those people? And what's their level of knowledge and commitment to you? Are they there for you or are they there for the deal? And that's a really important question. Are the schools winning? Yeah, I think the schools are winning in a way. They're getting a lot more attention. It's going to cost them a lot more, and I don't think most of them know how to pay for it. It's going to stratify college sports because if you're in the top five or six schools in the Big Ten or the top five or six schools in the SEC, you probably have a lot in common. If you're a school in the middle of the ACC, you may not be able to keep pace anymore.
Mhm.
So a lot of schools may be left behind in this kind of gold rush, if you will. So I think that's a loss inside a win, if you will. The sport is getting a lot more attention. All sports are getting more attention. And sure enough, we're trying to stratify some people out of it. Um, and then I think are the brands winning? I don't know if the brands have quite figured out how to win yet. They should be able to win. And let me give two examples of one that is winning, and let me give you one that I'm not sure quite figured it out right. The best NIL earner probably still is Livy Dunn, the gymnast from LSU.
LSU.
Now, she's very pretty. There's not much doubt that she's stunningly attractive, and she's probably doing something more traditionally akin to modeling. But even when she said she was going to stop participating in gymnastics, she realized that the idea that making her a model was less unusual than making her a gymnast model, if you
Yeah.
will. So she went back for another year of sports. So I think athletes have great stories, and certainly she earns her money, a catalog shoot, a photo shoot, a media appearance at a time. But it's really incredibly good found money, and she's been an incredible push for gymnastics as a whole. I give you the flip side of that, and her brand Vori has done great as a result. I hadn't heard about Vori until she became the face of it, and now Arch Manning is the face of Vori, and it's not going quite as well for him. I was going to say Dodge made a foray in and signed Drew Aller, the Penn State quarterback. But what happened to Drew Aller? He breaks his ankle, he's out for the season, and he's still doing the same spot for Dodge.
Yeah.
Well, did you have a backup plan for that? Did you know that injuries happen? And clearly, this was a case where the brand wasn't fully experienced to what NIL could mean, what it should mean, that you probably want to do that deal with a bunch of different people. And I point to, I'll harken back to my Penn State time in this. The two best ads I've seen in NIL were done by Pepsi. I think it's called Pure Leaf Tea, and they were part of a larger campaign that featured Allison Felix about athletes who overcame significant challenges. And one involved a young woman with hearing loss who was a volleyball player, and the other involved a swimmer who'd overcome cancer a couple of times. There was such great alignment in this ad because Pepsi was already a Penn State sponsor. They had the right to film in their venues, they had the right to use the logos and images. So it was really easy to do those ads. The two athletes got paid $5,000 for filming them and another $5,000 in the promotion stage. So it wasn't a ton of money. It was enough money for each to have a little bit more than they had. But those ads were fantabulous. And
Mhm.
I wish I'd copied a couple of them off the web because they're no longer found. The campaign ran and it's now deleted. But it was a fantastic campaign aimed at women, aimed at women through athletics, involving a tea product, which whether you drink tea or not, it was really uplifting and it was really well done. And I remember looking at the contracts for each of those, thinking these are some of the best written contracts I've seen. They're not complex. They're straightforward. The athlete understands what's required of them, and they're able to do it. And then the company gets exactly what it looks for from this. So I think as more companies get better at this and understand the possibility of it, they're going to get better at it. But I mean, look, I'm a former offensive lineman at a college, and I ate pizza a lot late at night. I would have been great. I'd have been a great spokesperson for late night pizza. If you're
Yeah.
going to trust somebody about late night pizza, trust me and not Livy Dunn.
Yeah.
So I think that there's NIL for everybody, and it creates opportunities for everybody. It's a question of finding your niche and finding your level in that
Yeah.
space.
Yeah. All right. Let's jump over to something that you did last year with Shoemaker Loop. Is you secured an injunction against the NCAA on behalf of DeJuan Clayton, a basketball player from Manhattan College. So, can you walk me through that case? And
Yeah.
is it representative of a growing tension between NCAA regulations and athlete rights?
Oh, absolutely. It's absolutely the tension point, right? Because it used to be what you could earn, who got to earn from their sports, which the NCAA banned throughout name, image, and likeness, and ultimately schools competing over them. Now it's become really, well, who gets to play?
Hmm.
And how long do you get to play? And who's a bona fide college student? And anybody who's in college knows that we rarely go to college now for 4 years between our age 18 and our age 22 or our age 17 and age 21. The immediate 4 years after high school is not how most people go to college. They go to college maybe for 3 years and they take some time off and they go back and finish or they so it's not normal for anymore to have that kind of historic Victorian idea that college was something that happened immediately after high school and only for some people. So even today, who our athletes are is reflective of who we are as college students or as students. So DeJuan Clayton was a young man who had some terribly rotten luck.
Hmm.
He had played for 4 years, or actually almost 5 years, at at Coppin State. He'd suffered 2 years where he lost the bulk of 2 seasons due to injury. He'd gotten waivers. He went to play as a graduate transfer at Hartford, and he got injured immediately. And what did Hartford do at the end of the season? They dropped out of Division 1 to Division 3. So he went to Cal. What happened at Cal? He arrived at Cal injured. He arrived hurt. He was the best player on the team. The coach at the time knew he needed to win, so he tried to press Clayton to play, and Clayton played ultimately part of 9 games, including a couple into January and February. Having played more than 10 games would have made him ineligible. Playing in January and February under the NCAA rule made him burn the season of eligibility, but he didn't have much choice into playing. He knew he was injured. He'd never been really cleared to play. And even the coach at Cal admitted that he was never healthy enough for me to play. If I was going to win and save my job, and they won 4 games that year, Clayton played a role in two of them where he was the leading scorer and top player. That was the only chance they had. And so, what did Clayton have? He had a year taken from him. Manhattan College tried to sign him, knowing he had time left. Pitt, Louisville, might have been a couple other bigger schools that had tried to sign him in NIL, thinking he had another year. But the NCAA kept refusing. And we started looking around, going, the NCAA has allowed 8-year players in some sports, 9-year players in football. Why are they not allowing Clayton? In fact, their compliance director said, "This I see no through line. These have been approved other places." So we tried to run this through the NCAA process. We tried to work through them. At the end of the day, as the season was slipping away, we basically had to go to court and seek an injunction to try to get him declared eligible, saying that the NCAA had was not following its own procedure, that it was an antitrust violator, and that its decision to not grant him eligibility was arbitrary and capricious, one they had to defend. And we were ultimately successful in that. He kind of entered a game in February in dramatic fashion, coming in at the half, riding the bike, waiting to get in and waiting for the injunction to drop. So it was a great story. It was a 6-hour hearing, which we did against a big law firm from San Francisco who get flown into I always like to say the Boogie Down Bronx because that's one of the nicknames for it. Um, Mostly from a rap song, which I have no knowledge of. But the idea that we were fighting for a kid, we did it with some criteria in mind. We did it because we wanted to have a good relationship with the school. We did it because the case got referred to us by a fairly famous lawyer I'd worked with before named Peter Ginsburg. And we thought it was the right thing to do. It helped us kind of figure out how to do these. We've done a couple others since then. I haven't led the charge. One of the person I met while doing this, Diana Florence, has led the charge in Michigan in a case involving a football player named Blake Buster at Eastern Michigan, with a successful one. We were unsuccessful getting the injunction in North Carolina for 3 Duke players and 1 North Carolina player, all kind of similarly situated. But I think in light of about 3 cases that are worth mentioning by name for anybody is nerdy enough to look them up. Case called Ohio v. NCAA, where a federal court struck down the NCAA's year sit out rule if you transferred, with the Ohio Attorney General leading a bipartisan group of attorney generals in that charge, is a really important case. It got us into court with Clayton in a way that Alston hadn't. And it basically said, look, the NCAA make rules that affect individual athletes harmfully and against their own policy. We should stop them from doing that. So I argued the Alston case a lot, the one that went to the Supreme Court. But I argued the Ohio versus NCAA case a lot, which had just been decided. Since then, the Vanderbilt quarterback Pavia has come down that
Yeah.
says, "Look, how can we count your non NCAA time as NCAA time in junior college?" There's been the Forquerian case where time in a lower division with a different standard might not count the same way. And the NCAA has rather than actually taking these decisions and say, look, we know that college athletes are different. There's a place where enough is enough, but it probably isn't 4 years. It probably isn't 5 years. It might be six, it might be seven, but where do we define that line? Maybe you have to be in a degree granting program. Maybe you have to be in a bona fide graduate program in that period of time. But there are a lot of compromises, but none of them have really been sort of revealed to be in favor of the athlete. So what has happened? Lawyers have gone to court with NIL in the background, but sometimes just the idea of continued participation in the foreground. And the Bustard case is certainly one of them. He wasn't a significant NIL recipient, but ultimately he wanted to play, and it was an opportunity for him to get scouted better and have a better opportunity at pro football. And he was still looking just for a fifth year. So we did a chart actually in that case. I wish we did a little less of a one in the Clayton case, but it became the idea. We did a chart of all players who had been playing 6, 7, and 8 years, and we found that our players weren't unique. And it kind of forced the NCAA to explain that back.
Yeah.
We have another case coming up, going to be coming up in South Carolina, I suspect within the month. And so I don't necessarily love these cases. They're a bit of a coin flip. Some judges have decided them in the favor of the athletes. Some judges have decided them in favor of the NCAA and not granting injunctions, at least, not maybe not necessarily concluding the case. So, but in each case, there's sometimes the athlete is forced to go and enforce his rights in court in a way the NCAA won't. And that still just bothers me because the NCAA is an essential organization to sports. And if they're not going to do that, then why do we have to ask the courts to do that? That
Yeah.
seems unfair. So and it in some cases it can be scurrilous. In the Clayton case, they alleged he didn't have any NIL. He wasn't really a bona fide student. He was just stealing his way into the game, and he didn't belong there. And we kind of blew that up because one of his assistant coaches who'd worked for the Philadelphia 76ers had been sitting in the audience, who'd been his high school coach. And we said, well, Your Honor, if the NCAA argues that, why don't we just put his coach on and see how that tests? And coach got on and said, "Yeah, I was a pro scout. I'm his college coach. I was his high school coach. Yes, he has NIL opportunities. Yes, he has pro prospects. Maybe not here in the United States, but certainly abroad. And yes, he is a bona fide student." And that really was the part that bothered me most that the NFL, the NCAA, not the NFL, the NCAA decided to attack the student in this circumstance, as opposed to saying, "Hey, look, we recognize that there are rules. You may not meet them. We're sorry about that." But they went on to attack his character, and that really, I got to say, can I use the word pissed? It pissed me off, and I was glad to win that one.
Yeah. All right. Now let's talk about something that you kind of hit it on a little bit earlier, and it's major large buyouts in modern college football. I mean, we've had, like you said, James Franklin a couple weeks ago, Brian Kelly. I think 2 or 3 years ago was Jimbo Fisher, almost 80 million. Napier this year, Gundy. I mean, this year there's been a lot, but I think
Just shout the name. There are going to be more of them.
yeah, there's more and more and more and more and more. And are buyouts achieving their intended purpose of job security or fueling instability?
Um, for a while, they secured some stability. They now are creating instability, and I'll say there are a couple factors behind that. One is that NIL has empowered a group of donors to feel like they can say anything they want and be as impatient as they want because they're paying the money for the players, and you can't fire them.
Hmm.
So I think NIL is a factor in the dissatisfaction of certain donors and the desire to fire, I think, otherwise pretty decent coaches. The other thing that I think has flown into this is that we are in a phase of new money, if you will, with some new media contracts and the college football playoff sort of kind of creating some new revenue. So I think wanting to be in that game of musical chairs when the music stops is a main driver. But I do think that also some negative factors are flowing into this. One of them is sports betting. I think sports betting has coarsened how fans and boosters view their sports and particularly their coaches. So I think some coaches are being fired because player fans, boosters, supporters are angry because their bets didn't come in or they didn't cover. So I think we're living in some short-term or immediate gratification that isn't well thought out. We also just went through a period, and we at Shoemaker did a lot of this. We did six major college athletic director separations. Now, not all of them exactly the same, but many of them had a couple common factors. New president wanted new AD and didn't really care if the current AD knew a lot or knew a little. And in most cases, they knew a lot and had done a pretty damn good job. So we did them at starting at Missouri, moving on over to Pitt, SMU, Stanford, Cal, and closer to home for y'all in Akron, where we got the AD a new job before he was out of the old job at Fordham, which was a better paying job. So we did six pretty prominent college athletic buyouts, and we really only caught up in contracts by about midsummer. I think we did our eighth extension right around the same time we gotten through our sixth separation. So some of the fact that ADs are less secure, presidents are less secure, some of that's COVID too. The fact that coaches are less secure right now,
Yeah.
and fans are venting their hostility or anger in very short-term ways. I hope that that will calm down, and I hope that people will see that the buyouts create a big bonfire where you throw a lot of money in them. On the other hand, our firm does a lot of work in those, so it's good for us in that way. We did a lot more. We did a lot of athletic director buyouts, and that paid more than getting a new athletic director hired a lot of the time contractually because it took more time. But I think if we're in the way that we're going to basically burn it down, it probably isn't productive
Mhm.
functionally, and it is something that I think a lot of people are going to be mad at. And I'm a little worried. I think we're heading toward a place, maybe not this year, but maybe next. If we maintain this pace, Congress is going to get involved.
Mhm.
And that's the last thing anybody wants
Yeah.
who's in this space. Coaches have had some advantages. They have a small number of agents who have a superior level of knowledge. They play the open jobs off against each other. They've done really well at that, and sometimes universities have been overmatched. It's another thing we've done at Shoemaker. We've sometimes advised universities on how to structure the contract for a new coach in
Yeah.
a way that isn't quite as exposed. And I think we have extended coaches' contracts too far. And I think we fire too often. So, I don't know any agent who wouldn't be happier to having more security for their coaches rather than longer contracts and more money.
Yeah.
And maybe longer contracts is not always the best way to provide that higher level of security. So I think those things are out there. So rather, that may sound like a very non-committal answer, but I think we're headed for a tipping point here, and I'd worry about that. And I'd say it to you this way: there's some congressional action about capping coaching pay. There's some opportunities. There's some complaints that we should do that. I don't think anybody. Maybe I'm saying that too clearly. Most people probably would not be upset if the coach at your school, like Nick Saban, is winning the way Nick Saban is winning.
Yeah.
What you're upset about is when you start to pay somebody who isn't winning at your school and no longer works there, Nick Saban like money to be away from you.
Mhm.
And that's the part that I worry about. So I think can we bring some sanity back to the length of contract, the extensions that we give? And the NFL doesn't have this problem nearly as much. Now they're a closed system. They're not subject to antitrust action as much as some of the others are. But every NFL coach signs a contract that with offsetted mitigation attached to it, and they generally have to go back to work at some point to
Yeah.
get their money. So, and it's rare you see an NFL head coach sign for much more than 5 years, and rare they get fired with more than 2 years remaining on a contract. So it's a much more comfortable position, even though some NFL coaches are making 15, 18 million. It's rare you see firings with that much dead money attached
Yeah.
to them. So I think colleges need to be more careful about that. They need to be more cognizant about how they extend, and maybe they need to think about contracts that limit some of the dead money that are attached here. Those would be my thoughts generally. And obviously there are really serious tax consequences, which my partner Bennett works on, that he's better than anybody else in the world on figuring out. But Penn State's definitely possibly looking at an excise tax involving James Franklin, and because the tax code treats the money that he is paid the next few years as an acceleration on the whole payment, he's going to have a tax bill on money he hasn't earned yet. So there are really important considerations kind of as we throw this into the big bucket and burn it. Athletics, one of the big challenges that we think we print money. And yeah, there's a lot of money in college athletics and pro athletics, but it's not unlimited.
Yeah. And when I see buyouts like that, like Fisher a couple years ago, $77 million, I'm like, how in the world is A&M paying for that? So how do they pay for that? Is it donors, collectives? Is the
Typically donors, yeah. Well,
yeah,
crowdsourced donor funding. Some of it might be new revenue from the conference. They joined the SEC, so their conference share went up. But it has a subtractive aspect. Even if there's new money to replace it, it's hard to ask that donor if you'll give me. It's hard to ask anybody. We give me $77 million to buy off the former coach. It's hard to ask them to make their $5 million contribution this year to a new complex, to NIL, to other things. So it really does carry a burden on the entire program. And I'm almost surprised A&M is back as fast as they are under Mike Elko. But if you follow Tommy Tuberville's career, he got paid to go away a couple times in his life. We won't talk about his politics, but he's a guy that's been paid to go away a couple times. And what that's usually done is it's usually harmed the program for a couple of years thereafter because they use their regular pace of donation to pay off somebody who isn't there. Notre Dame probably wandered in the wilderness for a while after Charlie Weiss and his contract. It's a little before your time now, but it
mhm,
was 20 years ago. But Weiss was for a number of years the highest paid football coach in the world with his collecting money from Notre Dame in Kansas, and he wasn't working anywhere. So it's a challenge if you're paying money to people that don't work for you. And that's where I would be up in arms. If I were a faculty, well, I am a faculty member, but I would be up in arms about dead money going out to somebody who was otherwise pretty good, who Dow doesn't coach here anymore. And I think it limits your possibilities of replacement. So sort of becomes your destiny. And one of the challenges of college sports versus pro sports is every pro sports team has a billionaire behind it. Now,
yeah,
sometimes they're a billionaire because they own the team and it made them rich, but they have all this revenue behind them. Colleges don't necessarily have that. They can fund it, they can build it from sources, they can get it even tax deductibly, but they don't have that same source of wealth. And that's one of the things that, as we're entering this phase of kind of free spending and what I would describe as burning money, we're not being cognizant of. And I think that will have an effect. And you'd hate to be the school that made a bad fire, couldn't find a replacement, and fell out of this consolidating game of musical chairs, fell out of their conference, couldn't compete
yeah,
because there often is a period of time where they can't compete.
yeah. And now jumping over a little bit to athletics and higher education, many people say that athletics are the front porch of a university. How do athletic projects, uh, like how athletics have they become too important within the university ecosystem? Is there too much of a focus on athletics more than academics right now?
It depends who you ask. I sort of believe that athletics is pretty darn important, but it probably isn't the be all and end all of the story. It is a piece of the story. So I would suggest to almost anybody who's out there looking at this that you want your academic institution and your athletic institution aligned.
Yeah,
That maybe it's a big front porch now. Maybe it's an important front porch for how you get recognized, but it isn't the whole game. And you want it to be part of the great story that college educations are, that love of colleges can become. Those are all really important in this business. And I think if we forget one for the other, we're missing what makes college sports great. Otherwise, we might as well go root for pro teams and not worry about it.
yeah, yeah. All right. Now going into a little bit of the future integrity of the sport is so you're an expert on realignment. You were involved in two college conference realignment reviews. Can you take us behind the scenes of this process and how much of a conference realignment is about sports performance versus media rights, branding, and strategy?
It depends on the level. In almost every case, strategy and alignment are key elements. Even if you're doing it for a small school in Virginia, which I was, versus or a conference like I did, um, you're going to have different drivers. Sometimes it's to protect what you have so that you're not left behind in the game of musical chairs. Sometimes it's trying to find the spot that fits you best. A lot of times that fit is really comes down to three dimensions if you think about it. You mentioned media rights are a key one. Two others, if you think about them, are what are my source of students? I want to be in a conference that helps me find the students that I want to find.
Yeah.
And another one really would be when you think about it, what are the alignment with the desired peers that I have? And I'll give you an example of a school that's not having a great football season at all in Boston College. But Boston
Yeah.
College was one of the drivers of the whole all the dominoes falling the first time we went through conference realignment. And Boston College, this very pretty Catholic school in Boston, in a beautiful, bucolic, rich suburb, suddenly said, I don't want to be associated with Providence and Seton Hall anymore. I say that having working there and liking Seton Hall quite a bit. Um, I want to be associated with Duke and North Carolina. And what's true in North Carolina and in the South and in Virginia, there are a lot of families having children who might want to send their kids to Boston to college. So we're getting a bigger source of younger people who will have children who will look at us. It will be a good place for us to play football and basketball. It won't be a great place for us to play hockey. We're staying at Hockey East, but it might bring us more money from the ACC's media package for our hockey program to help us be more competitive. The answers to that have all been mixed, but I think Boston College has established its identity pretty neatly in the ACC. UConn, by the same token, got left behind by the ACC, left out, if you will. They were able to figure out how to win two national championships in basketball, and conference sort of became a who cares?
Yeah.
We can be whatever conference we want to be, Big East, American, as long as we win at the level we win at and have the coach we need. So conference means a lot. It isn't the sole determinator, and Notre Dame's certainly doing pretty darn well as an independent right now. But I do think for a lot of schools, the conference decision is a critical one. I'll never forget the day Penn State went in, and way before I had any connection to the school, other than going to football camp there as a high school kid, Penn State went to the Big Ten. Suddenly, Penn State made sense. Penn State's peers weren't Delaware and North Carolina State and Villanova anymore. They were Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, and so on. So it helped the school academically, it helped the school in its overall status, and it helped the school in the students who wanted to go there. So if you can kind of pull that off, that's a win. On the flip side, did Maryland gain a ton by going to the Big Ten other than some money for media rights? Nah, probably not.
Hmm.
Did do we see that UCLA and USC have, other than money, have gained a ton by being in the Big Ten? Probably not. In fact, it's made the competitive set probably really complicated. So, yeah, I think it's a mixed bag. And I think one of the cases why I think I actually have good advice on this one in the strategy is look at the dollars, look at the travel, look at the additive or accretive benefits, and then look at the negative benefits of the costs, and maybe you can figure this out. One of the challenges we have right now is we've done a poor job of the logistics and a poor job of the planning of this to be a fairer way to sports that aren't football.
Yeah.
And actually, even football is pretty challenging if you have to make a bunch of cross-country flights a year. So I would have thought that bigger conferences might have made fewer commitments to playing in conference, but a consistent one, maybe say 7 or 8 games and a conference championship. Those things have kind of gone away. So it's a complicated world right now because conferences are now too big, and it's almost we're heading towards super conferences, or we're headed for a stratification of the conferences themselves. So no one can say where this game goes next. But I was on a call just before this with a bunch of athletic directors who are in the group of six, who none of them feel very secure that they're going to have a place at the next table and are very worried about it. And they're sort of studying up and doing some background and boning up so they know exactly where their place is. And I think that's an important thing to think about because it's hard to predict where the chips will fall.
Yeah. And talking about that future, and it's hard to predict where everything's going. How optimistic are you about the direction of college sports right now?
Look, I believe in college sports. It was one of the great experiences of my life. It's life changing. It's life changing for the people who play it. For the vast majority of the people who get to take part in it, it's an extraordinary experience. I always kind of say to people, even people who are getting cut from teams, parents who are upset by that, or didn't experience what they were hoping to. 68 teams go to the tournament every year. And only 60 and only one wins at the end of the day and cuts down the nets. Do the other 67 said, I should have stayed home?
No.
I might have stayed home and ordered pizza, it would have been better. No, nobody says that. So we get our benefit in the competing. It doesn't always turn out our way, and that's a reality. I'm worried about how it'll turn out. I'm not completely optimistic how it will turn out. I'm not completely optimistic that we aren't going to mess up the things that make it special, which to me are all sports programs, programs in the Olympic sports, programs in women's sports, programs that extend the university. I worry that we may become kind of a mini NFL, which will turn those sports into a bit of a minor league and be less meaningful. So I have a lot of worries, and we're in a time of clear change. I'm also a little worried that we don't have a lot of clear answers coming down the pike. And I suspect with the current administration and some of the challenges of Congress, we're not going to get those answers in the next few years.
Yeah.
So my biggest pessimism is this, that this is a sport that needs some answers kind of clearly, or a business that needs some answers kind of clearly, and that those answers may not be there for the next 4 or 5 years and maybe 8 years, which means every athlete who's playing now is sort of in an undecided zone or a new or a no man's land, if you will, that we can't quite figure out. So we're going to be working to do the best we can inside of that, take the joy of what it is, and look at the corruptions and insincerities in that with a grain of salt. So I do think it'll be here when we're done. If we came back and talked 8 years from now, hopefully I'm here. But if we went back and talked in 8 years, um, I think it would still be here. I think it would still have meaning. I worry that we might mess it up in ways that could put it on a course for being less meaningful, and that would worry me and make me sad because I really, really, really like college sports and believe in them. I like pro sports and I like Olympic sports too, but there is something special about the chance to change your life because it involves the chance to be educated, the chance to meet new people, and the chance to participate wearing a uniform of a school.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And now, what advice would you give to today's athletic directors, conference leaders, sports lawyers, and anyone that's aspiring for any of those positions or just a career in sports?
I can't give away all my secrets, right?
Mhm.
So let's address it generally. There are a lot of opportunities in sports for a lot of people, and they're not one path or two paths or three paths. There are thousands of them. So I would invest in my education. I would get some good sports business education, programs like Ohio or NYU, or even my law program at Seton Hall if you want to get a law degree. But I would not being too pitchy here,
Mhm.
but I would definitely think about my education, and I would think about the fact that this is one of the largest businesses in the world, and come to it in a way that's authentic and passionate about you. If you like marketing, certainly has marketing opportunities. If you like branding, there are branding opportunities. If you're a creative type and want to make commercials or do video or create content, my God, there's a lot of that to be done.
Mhm.
We're really motivated by them. If you're a lawyer like me and want to help people inside the legal system, there are opportunities for you. So I still think that sport offers tons of opportunities to have a life that's passionate, that you're engaged in, and certainly I've never been as real or as happy when I'm working in sports, and I get to enjoy that. I've done regular law periodically in my life. I think I do it okay, but I'm not the same when I do it. So I think you have to find your own happiness, find your own joy, and there are going to be some people that would just be happy to be in the stands and talk about it or bet on it. I'm not one of them. I need to be at the game and in it. So, but each of us finds our own path. but know that this is a very real path. Majoring in sports management or sports business or sports marketing is a real major in college. It's a real graduate opportunity at schools. And don't be afraid to think about that as something that makes us engaged and lights us on fire about our classes.
Yeah. And now is probably my favorite part of these interviews is a little lightning round here where I got some fast, quick answer questions for you.
Okay.
So, what is your favorite campus coffee? Penn State, NYU, Ohio, or Seton Hall?
I don't drink coffee and I drink Diet Coke everywhere. It's pretty much the same every place.
Okay. Okay.
I will tell you, I've been less comfortable on campuses that were Pepsi schools, and I got my own refrigerator this year at Seton Hall to keep my Diet Coke in.
That's awesome. What is tougher, negotiating contracts or teaching 8 a.m. law students?
8 a.m. classes.
All right. What's one thing you noticed during a sports game that the average fan probably wouldn't?
Oh, God, everything. Offensive lineman. That may be just me. I think you notice. I think you notice very minute stuff about games when you're in the business, and sometimes it isn't always. It's more interesting sometimes,
Yeah.
and sometimes I'm sure you're a bore that you don't just follow the ball. So I don't know if there's a single thing, but God, there's so many things as you think about it.
Yeah. One word for the future of college sports.
On fire in both good and bad ways. That's two words I know, but
Yeah, I'll give it to you.
en fuego.
En fuego. If you could abolish one NCAA rule forever, forever and ever, what would it be?
I would have an eligibility standard that lasted up to 7 years as long as the athlete was in a graduate program.
Okay. All right.
So no more this 5 year eligibility, 4 year eligibility. If you're really a student and you're really making progress, you get to play a little longer.
What is your proudest professional moment so far?
Like, is there a single one? I hope it's ahead of me.
Okay.
I
That's a
hope
good
it's ahead
answer.
of me. Yeah.
All right. Who are you rooting for on Saturdays and Sundays?
My friends, one of the bad parts about being in the business is that your favorite teams often fire your friends, and then you just follow them. I'm historically a Mets, Jets, Knicks, and Rangers fan
Okay.
from my life. It's almost impossible to be a Jets fan of any long standing the way they've been going lately. Um, I often rooted for Penn State while I was there. I probably will root for them for the rest of my life a little bit. I kind of cheer Notre Dame periodically, and
Yep.
if the Columbia Lions are having a good year, I'm all in on my college.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a Giants, Yankees, Rangers, Knicks, so it's not that far off.
Not that far off. Well, and that's usually who our parents were and what they got us with. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And final question is, what are you doing on any given Monday?
Trying to figure out what the heck happened over the weekend that's changed our world, whether it's a coaching change. Lately, it's been coach firings.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I think it's been 3 weeks in a row we've had a client or an opportunity related to it. And one of the lawyers I work with, sent me Queen's version of another one, Bites the Dust,
Hmm.
which I remember when I played football in high school, we occasionally sang. I didn't quite put it together. It's like, oh yeah, Auburn fired Hugh Freeze. There's another. We don't have anybody in that fight, but yeah, we've been looking for what's going on with our clients lately. Always looking for a trend, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. All right. That's all I got for you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Matthew, thank you for having me. You're brilliant.